Hello and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG podcast. I am Clayton.
Kyle Perkins.
Katie.
Jordan.
We have a listener survey available, and this is the final episode that will be released before the survey closes at the end of July. You can complete the survey and give us some feedback on the show, and one person who completes the survey will win a chainmail dice bag created by me. And also, before we get started, you can find show notes and more, including a link to the survey, at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia.com, and we have a Patreon. So if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, we would greatly appreciate it.
So something Clayton didn't specify going into this, listeners, is the chainmail dice bag isn't actually made out of, like, physical medieval chainmail. It's actually made out of, like, forwarded email copies, like chainmail.
Oh, yeah. The more forwards you get, each forward chainmail dice bag gets a link. And if you actually share this with 10 friends...
You could get even more. It gets bigger.
Gonorrhea.
The sexually transmitted disease.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that, like, eventually it consumes your whole house.
The more you email, the higher your chances are... Well, unprotected email specifically, the higher your chances are of acquiring gonorrhea.
Well, I need at least 400 links in order to make one chainmail dice bag.
You slut.
What chain email are we doing? Are we doing the, like, one photo of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine being like, can this patriot get 5 reblogs or 5 forwards?
I want to see my entire Facebook feed decked out in this image.
Very good. So that's what you can look forward to if you answer the listener survey. Now, why would you? Gonorrhea? Is that how you sold this?
I think we've really done a lot of bad here things, and just in that opening introduction, it is real chainmail. It is not medieval chainmail because, well, that would have rusted by now.
Well, the iron is processed from rust that was probably originally rust in the medieval period.
Wow.
Think about that.
But there's no gonorrhea on it.
No, 0%.
Is there a reason gonorrhea was, like, floating around your head there? Or?
Well, every time I do the nasty, I wear my chainmail dice bag around myself as protection.
Of course.
And I still got gonorrhea, so I guess I should stop.
This is more of like a call for help.
Yes.
And a trip to the hospital for your girlfriend.
Yes. It's a call for help very much so.
All right, let's actually get into a topic. Our topic today is we're going to be talking about brainstorming a brand new setting. This is going to be a new thing for us. We're going to be just going at this without anything in front of us, only the thoughts in our minds. This will give you a practical look into our creative processes and kind of the things that go through our minds in case our introductions here wasn't enough to give you a horrifying glimpse into the workings of our brains.
You could say that we're really parting the kimono for this episode.
Have you ever, there's the thought idea that maybe, like, we shouldn't be WebMD, which I think is a well thought out practice. Let's not contribute medical advice.
Yes, we are not a medical podcast, so I think not giving medical advice would be advisable. So, what setting are we going to create? Are we going to create a fantasy setting? Are we going to modify a modern setting? Or are we going to do a futuristic setting? Where are we going to start?
Let's go blank slate.
Okay.
Start from scratch with a brand new setting. Fantasy is easier to kind of spitball, I think. Because you can come up with all kinds of wacky shit. For my part, when I've made a fantasy setting, I always start with the gods, like pre-creation. Figure out where the shit comes from. And then I think that kind of informs your world.
Mm-hmm.
That's my step 0.
So is this going to be a setting with one pantheon or one set of gods? Or are we going to have multiple pantheons there, like different regions worshipping different gods, or different regions worshipping variations on the core gods?
Isn't that usually the way that it works? That you actually have like a true pantheon, and then like there's like cultural faces slapped on them.
Not in Greyhawk.
Not in Greyhawk.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't played Greyhawk since I was fucking 13 years old. There's always like one creator god, though, right? Like one head dude.
Very often.
Or did they flip it where if you're arguing with a pantheon that has human-like characteristics, a lot of the times they aren't necessarily the creator gods. They're just sort of the, like, philosophical, like, demiurge sort of maintainers of reality, not so much the creators of reality. I mean, now maybe I'm talking out of my ass, but Zeus didn't necessarily make Earth or anything,
right?
You know,
No, he's a second generation deity.
So I feel like a lot of the times D&D / any pantheon of world creation, you are dealing with, like, you leave the idea of creator deity like ambiguous, or you say it's a case of like, yes, the earth deity formed the earth and mated with the sky deity.
And Forgotten Realms,
there you
isn't
go.
it Io or something?
Yes,
Isn't that
Io.
like the totally impersonal, just creative source of
Yeah,
everything?
In Forgotten Realms, Io is the god of the gods.
Right. Yeah, no, he doesn't have clerics. It doesn't have clerics or anything. He's the power source.
What if whatever created the physical realm sort of fractured off, either on purpose or through some event, into the pantheon?
So like it was a whole, now it's
fractured parts. Maybe it decided to do that on purpose. Maybe a cataclysm happened and it was split forcibly. Maybe the races that this one god created attacked it and split it off into different shards. Whatever. But I kind of like that idea.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And we still need to take a step back and look at whatever it was when it was whole, perhaps. But
That's the formless source of all things. It's the singularity.
So I'm liking the idea of, like, the history is of the creation is that in the beginning there was this one creative, there was this one major thing in the world, or that was the world, and then it created everything. It created the races, and then, or at least one race, and then its creation overthrew it, and in the process of overthrowing it, fractured it into all of the disparate parts that become like your typical D&D like house god system, where like this god is over war, this god is over wisdom, this god is over the sun, this god is over darkness, etc.
I like that. I don't want to have just one race created by the OG godhead, because even if you have a rumor that that's the case, that's how you get Nazis.
I had this idea. What if it created elves and humans, and like elves were like metropolitan, or high magic, and the humans are more nomadic, like living out in the mountains or something. And you could even have like the elves created through magical means another race. Or something along those lines. Something where, like, the two are supposed to be counterweights to each other, so, like, while the elves may have magic, right, they don't have just good old-fashioned human ingenuity or something along those lines. Maybe they're not very combat-oriented, and, of course, humans, we are.
I just don't want any race to be able to say, "Oh yeah, we're the true race."
The OG race. So I don't know. That's my.
I like the idea a lot of having races that were created by the OG Godhead to be foils
Kinda like
to
a
each other.
yin and yang.
I like that idea specifically.
I think then, and see, this is now we're looking into my creative process. If I were to play a half elf in this universe, I think that would give you a lot of characterization to work with, since you're this like combination of both of the progenitor races. Does that make you feel entitled? I think it definitely gives you more of that half elf experience of neither part of my family accepts me, which doesn't, I feel like lately in D&D kind of tends to get overlooked, but I know that was supposed to be a big part of old school half elves, was like, yeah, you may be more diplomatic or charismatic because you know how to navigate these circles, but neither of them are ever going to really accept you for what you are.
There's not really anything bad about being anyone in 5th edition D&D anymore. Except for arguably Drow maybe. But
So do we want the two original races to be human and elf? Because in general, elves are, elves tend to be good aligned, and humans tend to be like whatever. Like they have the spectrum. I feel like that's a weird dichotomy to have this one generally good aligned race, and then just humans.
Well, I don't feel like we wouldn't have to even throw that alignment onto them.
Hold up a minute, hold up. In order to discern what these two foil to each other races are, I still think we need to take a step back and look at the OG god and think, all right, what kinds of races would this god have made? Well, we don't know anything about this god. We don't know its motivations for making these two races. We can't decide what they are yet.
Is there a fantasy setting where they start out with, like, something like Australopithecus or something, some, like, proto-race that doesn't exist anymore, that's, like, the branching off point from all the other ones?
Well, these so-called lying scientists of today, they like to spin this fantasy that we're evolved from monkeys. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
No, Jordan, I actually can't think of any good fantasy, or any fantasy universe.
It's
like
sci-fi, but Halo has the Forerunners, or whatever they were called. I actually, full disclosure, don't know that much about the Halo mythos anymore. It's probably evolved since I read the books.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of sci-fi universes
Trek's
where...
got that.
Huh?
Trek's got that.
Yeah. Like, there's a proto-race that was, perhaps seeded by some highly advanced aliens, whatever.
So before we get, like, something I want to know about this setting is good and evil a definable thing?
Oh, okay. This is a good idea. Going back to high concepts before we get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. There's lots of other interesting ways of doing it. I've always liked Michael Moorcock's emphasis on law versus chaos instead of anything like good and evil. It's a lot easier to, like, articulate and, point to.
Yeah, I like that's kind of, I think, tying into my thoughts on the two races was a law versus chaos dichotomy, not a good versus moral, ambiguous morality.
Yeah. And in his version of that, the only thing that is kind of close to good is the balance, because he shows lots of examples of one side or the other getting dominance in one plane of existence or another, and it's different kinds of hells wherever you go where that happens.
Well, what other dichotomies could we do? Good, evil, law, chaos.
Civilization, nature. That would be good if we're doing human versus elves.
Mm-hmm. What about, this is going to be weird, but what about, like, physical matter versus something less corporeal?
Magic.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, like, magic versus the absence of magic, or like, rejection of magic.
The natural versus the supernatural.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys ever look at the Wheel of Time series from Robert Jordan?
Once I realized how long it was, I didn't pick them up.
It's preposterous. Every book is like a Metropolitan phone book, but in that, magic is like this horribly abusive thing that you're doing to the universe that fucks it up, fucks you up, but it's a thing that people can do, and,
No one's happy doing it.
It never works out well, but, people get pushed to extremes and use that as an option, but...
What about, like, okay, bear with me, time versus space, or essentially, like, a race that exists outside of a linear time frame and a race that exists within a linear time frame.
But outside of space?
I would just like to point out that time and space are probably the same thing.
I know, I shouldn't have said space. Thank you both. Thank you very much. Now listen to my fucking idea. A race that exists outside of linear time and a race that exists within a linear time frame.
How in the fuck do you represent that in a role-playing game?
Well,
that's our challenge.
So, like, elves could be super long-lived, like 2,000 years.
We're just immortal, like Tolkien.
Sure, yeah. Like, can be killed, but, like, just don't die of old age. Hell, and that's kind of outside of linear time.
There's some shit in Tolkien that just can't even be killed. You just lock it up forever.
I think that could kind of work. I mean, that's definitely... I think Kyle's onto something with the dichotomy between, like, a flash in the pan for one being like, your entire life for another. I've always thought in traditional D&D that's an interesting thing. that doesn't get explored super often.
Yeah, rarely does a D&D game touch on the abject insanity of, like, someone who lives 2,000 years just bebopping around small towns and dungeons with, like, a human who lives 80 years.
Right. Whatever those eternal things are, those are going to be your de facto gods.
Oh, interesting. So not the races themselves, but the pantheon.
What if the things that can live eternally have no concept of death? Maybe they are not as adept at living with, interacting with, creating and crafting matter, or this is getting very sci-fi, but I don't mean it to be, but essentially the race that lives much shorter is, in the shorter term, much more powerful at sculpting the world, and the race that lives forever. They get to, see and live outside of this cycle of life and death, but they're not very good at building and creating things within the world. So if all of the short-lived race were gone, the immortal race just would be left with a big empty. They wouldn't be able to do anything with it.
So I'm kind of liking the idea that the immortal race is the one who is essentially worshipped as gods now, and we've been saying them like humans and the mortal race and stuff. But I think that could be where in most fantasy you've got a multitude of races. You can still have like the dichotomy between mortal and immortal, and just have the mortal be the part that fractures off into all the humans and orcs and goblins and dwarves and halflings and all of that.
So far as the motives of like the high god thing, I think that kind of thing is like sort of beyond any coherent speculation. That sort of thing I feel like should just be left to like a Big Bang kind of occurrence. What motive do you have when you're talking about something like that? What does motive even mean when you're talking about the starting point of everything?
There's this idea of this concept called the will, and it's essentially just it does. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have a reason. It doesn't have a motive. It is not capable of understanding or reasoning. It just does.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think that's basically one of the better ways to do a like creative force.
Right.
Is just it acts. It does.
So what if this...
Why do storms happen?
Right. So what if this will that just generates a universe and then just plops some immortals in the middle of it? That's just the thing it did, and that's all it did, and it's not going to do anything else so far as anyone can ever tell. But it's effectively made this sort of static state kind of world, and then these immortals are like, well,
guess we'll make something of it.
Been here for 10 billion years and nothing's happened, so let's make some interesting things to crawl around and build cities and fight each other and what have you.
Here's a wacky idea. I like where this is all going. The will creates the immortal race to live within the world it made just because it had the will to do so. All of that happens. Somehow, whether it's killed or it chooses to die or something happens, the will, the original Godhead, when it dies, I'm air quoting with my fingers, and fractures, it fractures into mortal races. So its immense amount of power and whatever fractures off into all of these mortal races that now have a direct connection because they came from the will, the Godhead. But the Godhead created these immortal races, so they also have that connection. And now you don't have just one race that can claim to be like, yeah, he made us, you've got these two races that may or may not be at odds because they both came from the will, the Godhead, in different capacities.
I like that idea, but it raises another question for me. This thing that we are describing now, that this, quote, history, is this actual history or is this the belief, the story? Because if it's the actual history, I think I would take that and run, and I would do where like each successive generation is a little bit weaker as there's more and more people, more and more of the different races. Each race kind of gets weaker along the way, like in the way that in Vampire, the generations of vampires get weaker and weaker after the source. So here and this also introduces like some sort of like method of change in the world, in that things are objectively getting worse, and this is kind of what a hero is here to like kind of rectify.
That's an interesting point that I think a lot of fantasy universes ignore, is entropy. And sometimes you'll see it in like apocalyptic, like leaning stuff. Like Tolkien's got a lot of that, like final battle kind of framework to it. But there's never any explanation as to how the fuck the Forgotten Realms have gone on for 10 millennia or whatever, and things are pretty much the same as they were 6,000 years ago or whatever.
Same with the Old Republic.
Yeah, we
Star
just
Wars.
have like this basically static government that just ebbs and flows, and that doesn't really change until like the Rise of the Empire.
Until one man, Anakin Skywalker, is born.
Yeah, was Palpatine the first politician to have an original thought? And,
Apparently.
Well,
Well, there's the whole like thing of
Wait, I am the Senate.
I am the Senate. And everyone's like, holy shit.
There goes fucking. How long is
Like
10
10 millennia.
Yeah.
10,000 years of fucking Republican government. Yeah, that's strange. But I like all these ideas, because I like the idea that there could be a race, whether it's elves or whatever, that through magical means or technological means seek to prolong their own life, because they know that the more that time goes on, the weaker they're going to get. So how best to maintain power, but the longer you live, the more you're going to keep your share of the power.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe even their process of reproduction is like rare, given that.
If you're immortal, do you need to reproduce?
Well, these aren't the immortals.
Oh, okay.
This is like going off your idea of the more generations go on, the weaker you get. I think it would make sense to have one of these races, whatever you want to have it be hyper focused on prolonging their own lifespans.
So they don't dilute the power as much. They
whether it's out of their own twisted sense of like altruistic, like one of us has to be able to stand up to like the immortals or something, you know, and we'll have the most power, or if it's literally personal gain of all these fuckers, the humans are, you know, fucking like rabbits and diluting this power. Like, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep it as uniform as we can.
This sounds, or at least this is kind of reminding me of like sort of Hindu cosmology kind of stuff, where like you kind of got everything as like this, you know, sort of deity energy. So like if we've got this, you know, one starting, you know, will to power thing that like explodes reality into existence, that thing just transformed into the universe, and so we're all just kind of parts of that thing. Now, if you've got these discrete units with varying degrees of power, all, you know, life, energy, whatever, you know, these immortal things are going to be like these huge chunks of that original divine energy that's like super potent. And then you got all these other little things that are kind of scrambling around, eating each other, you know, learning, whatever, trying to accumulate as much of this energy for themselves. But then these things are like, you know, this original piece of that first creation that, as you would subdivide that out, if there's finite energy in the whole thing, the finite, you know, divine creative force or whatever, eventually, over so many generations, it's just diluted so much. It's like that Jet Li movie, The One.
Oh yeah, where you just keep killing the incarnations till there's only 2 left with maximum power.
Right, or like Highlander or whatever you want to do. So yeah, I don't know. That's just thoughts I had.
I like that because it automatically creates some fracturing and some pretty interesting, that I'm excited to get into, but we're not quite there yet, factions within the mortal races, and also some interesting motivation for both immortal and mortal races. Obviously, you could have a faction that wants this dilution to happen and fucks like rabbits. You could have a faction that believes that only by uniting all of the mortal races that used to be part of the main original god can we get the power back. We have to go and kill and cannibalize the immortals to get the power back. Like, there's all sorts of interesting things I think that could come from that.
Can we talk about like actual like planetary cosmology?
Well, flat Earth, obviously, because that's the truth.
Yeah.
A big disc.
Nothing else makes sense.
Ice walls.
Ring world. Halo.
Well, the kind of life that would arise if you've got anything approaching normal physics as being like the day-to-day workings of the universe, that sets some parameters for like, you know, what your world's going to look like. If you had a planet as big as Jupiter, you wouldn't have anything that looked like humans.
Well, I think when, just in general, coming up with the universe, it is best to, like, stick to what you know. It'd be a lot easier for you as the game master to plan and create a world with some basis in reality, so you have a benchmark, rather than being like, you're like, sure, that's a creative challenge for you to be like, I'm going to make it the size of Jupiter, and, like, boy, shit's going to be fucking weird, you know? Like,
There's some interesting astronomical sugar you can sprinkle on it, though. Like in Kryn from Dragonlance, they've got 3 moons. Yeah, so in Dragonlance, you got the 3 moons. The white moon is like the good magic, the red moon's neutral magic, and then the black moon is evil magic. And depending on where they're at in the sky and in their phases, the power of those magics waxes and wanes. You could also have things like rings, asteroid belts, you know, whatever. What's the sun like? Can you get to other planets?
Well, since this is fantasy, most traditional fantasy is concerned with, okay, this is just one world. It's got astronomical phenomena that's relatively comprehensible to your typical gamer without having to spend pages upon pages of explaining it. So I think just like an Earth-like gravity, Earth-like composition of the atmosphere and all of that would be easiest in a fantasy game to convey. You can just say, okay, everything's the same here. A year is 365 days, or you can round it up or down to make the months nice and even.
I like that method.
The only thing I would like to add would be the possibility for some kind of extra normal or extra planar travel. Like, I think that should be baseline, what you just described. But there could be, you know, you can magically teleport to the moons, or there is like a series of, like, you know, you've got your Earth-like planet with all of, I'm just spitballing, the mortal races on it, and then there's like a Halo world with the inside surface of that is where the immortals live, and you can transport between them. Like, some easy to grasp, easy to grok, magical transportation between either planes or bodies would be really cool, I think.
And it all exists within a crystal sphere. If we're going that direction, which is very spelljammery.
Planes of existence. How many?
Do we want each race to have its own plane? Do we want to force them to live in one plane, but there are other planes with just some resources you can go grab?
well, obviously, I think the immortals should exist on one plane. Maybe that's not obviously, that was the wrong word there, but that my opinion is that they should have a plane, and the mortal races should have a plane, and then, you know, it'd be kind of wild if there was like a third plane with just extra dimensional beings that don't follow the rules of what's standard in the other 2 planes. I don't know what exactly those things would be, but that could be where you as a GM can get kind of creative with like making some wild shit. Like if you wanted your campaign to be less factions at war in the universe and more of a Star Wars fucking use hand bong, like things are coming in from the outside and everyone's like, holy shit, what the fuck are those things? That gives you reason to do that. I mean, because I think that, you know, obviously versus an outsider is a pretty common like D&D trope. Like we gotta rally the races to fight the outsider, you know. And you can get you don't get that as much with fighting the immortal things. Bless you.
I'm sorry.
You're okay. Because technically those also came from the same thing you did. This would be something that just as maybe it came from the will, maybe it didn't. Just a fucking.
I was about to ask. It kind of blows the zero-sum game of like everything scrambling for pieces of the divine whole.
I'm happy with having something that doesn't follow the rest of the rules, that is being introduced as the we've got this problem, that is defined of like the stuff that we've known about forever. But then the crux of the campaign or of the story at the point where the PCs interact with it is, well, we just discovered that there's this thing that we have no idea what it is, what it wants, or even where it fits within our cosmology.
That's always a fun little chestnut to crack.
Because it could, right? But like, it's possible that in universe you have no clue, right? Like you as the writer and like your own version of the will, since you're the one spewing all this out of your head, you can know where it fits in. But it would make sense that, and I'm actually, this is something I do when I'm creating a universe for a game. There are some times where I'll introduce mysteries that I'll either flesh out as the game progresses, or I'll have the players help me flesh out.
Absolutely.
So like this would be totally something I would do, where I would make this that doesn't follow the rules and then be like, I'll just figure that out later. You know? Or I'll see if I can like maybe come up with a cool reason for why that's there.
Well, all right, let's get back to our plane or planes of existence. I liked this idea in my head of original will creates the immortal races, therefore creates either a body for them to exist on, a planet, or a plane for them to exist in. Then when the will fractures into the mortal races, they are either in a different planet or different plane, or like I have this interesting idea of like the one plane, whatever shape it takes, whether it's a sphere or a disc or whatever, it is facing opposite the other one. And so like you look up in the sky and you have light and you have stars, but you can also see the other body where the others live, and travel between the two could be possible.
What if the immortals could like hop between them, step sideways between worlds at will? And that's like part of the reason why it's so fucking hard for any mortal races to ever like fight and kill them.
And so if they step into the mortal realm, they can just step back out.
Yeah.
And if they step into the mortal realm, they could take mortals back to their realm, and now you're just stuck there and you can't get back over. Although obviously I think that the mortals should discover a way to do that too, but it's, not intrinsic to them.
Immortal abduction.
So are these immortals kind of like Fae, like the Celtic Fae, where they have this other realm that's just, there is weird shit there, and mortals don't really understand what the hell's going on?
I think that's about right. Yeah.
I like that. So what do you guys think of this idea of, like, say, a sphere where people live on the outside of that sphere, and another sphere around it where the others, whether they're mortals or immortals, live on the inside of that, and so you can just look up and see, or maybe two strips that are, running concentrically or something like that.
Is the sun floating between them? Is this like a Dyson sphere with the Earth in the middle, the sun floating at some midpoint, orbiting around the Earth, and then the Dyson sphere shell of, the immortal realm beyond the stars or whatever?
So I'm thinking that the immortals, by virtue of the fact that they are immortal, are not going to be as numerous as the mortal races. So I think that the mortal should have the bigger world in what we're saying. I like the Dyson sphere thing with the sun in the center, and like maybe like using the ring world idea. The ring world is around the sun, and then the mortal races are on the interior of the Dyson sphere.
Oh, hold up. I love this. Okay, you have a sun, it exudes light. It's a sphere that exudes light in all directions, right? Around that, this is a Dyson sphere, you have a hollow sphere built around the sun, and our mortals, because they are more numerous, our mortals, not the immortals. Mortal races live on the inside of the sphere, so now they have light and they have warmth. The immortal plane is a hemisphere, much smaller, around that sun, and the hemisphere rotates so that the mortal, larger sphere has a night and day cycle, and I guess that means the immortal hemisphere would
Be eternal day.
be eternal day.
Well, hell, you could do
Be
something
right
like,
at the same
like a toroid shape. Like, you got your outer Dyson sphere where the humans live. You got the sun in the core. You could have the immortals living on like a ring world around the sun within that. And if that thing's rotating and is of sufficient width, that's going to give you a day-night cycle as well.
So you'd have 2 nights effective.
No.
If it's rotating on a 12 or 48, I can't figure out right now which one it would be. You'd still have a 24-hour day-night cycle. It's just each night is a different side of the ring that's rotating. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I like that.
The immortals could live on either side, I guess.
And going back to your idea from Dragonlance with those moons, what if... okay, so I want to make sure our listeners are picturing this, and I guess us too.
Well, I'm a basic fantasy bitch, so you guys lost me like 10
All
minutes.
right. Well, I'm going to try to explain this. I'm going to use my teacher skills. You have a sun, exuding light all around. Hollow sphere encasing the sun. It's a gobstopper.
So,
right?
like, the sun doesn't go outside the sphere.
Correct. The sun is the size of my fist. The sphere is the size of a beach ball. And for you listeners at home, my fist is average size. Wink, I guess. So, my fist is the sun. A beach ball surrounding my fist, my forearm doesn't exist, is the mortal plane. Now you've got sun with light and warmth. People live on the inside of the beach ball. Clear? Mm-hmm. Clear as mud? Now, the immortals, so now picture a halo from the Halo games, a ring world that is smaller than the beach ball, but bigger than my fist. This ring that goes around inside the beach ball, that ring is of sufficient width, and it is rotating so that it occludes some sunlight, thus casting a shadow onto the interior of the beach ball, creating nighttime.
So day and night.
And when that ring rotates out of the way, now it's day, but there's another side of the ring that is going to swing over to that same spot on the inside of the beach ball and create night again. And going with the moon idea, each side of that ring creates a different type of night, I don't know, but a different tide or something that affects magic differently. Is that too complex? I'm thinking just 2.
So this mortal world does not have stars, does not have constellations, does not have a moon. They just have this thing that's... There's nothing in the night sky. The night sky is black.
I would speculate that maps were never developed, yet exploration happened much faster, because you literally see the map of the coming continent rising in front of you, and there is no such thing as a horizon full of mystery ahead of you.
Yeah, during daytime, you would see a good amount of the other side of the interior of the beach ball. And during nighttime, you would see the bottom of the ring that is rotating upon which the immortals live, and maybe the bottom of that ring has some interesting glowing dots on it that could be constellations or something cool.
You'd also get reflective glow of the 2 quarters of the Dyson sphere that are currently in daylight.
You would not have absolute darkness on the surface at any time.
Well, this is magic. It's a magical ring.
I think this outer Dyson sphere world is so weird that it would make more sense to be the realm of the immortals. And the fact that it's so much bigger and there are so fewer immortals, I like the idea that one guy wanders off into this vast Dyson sphere world on his own, doesn't see anyone else for 100,000 years, is just wandering a continent and he's the only fucker there. You know, like, just the deep loneliness and, deep time of that whole kind of thing. You know what I'm saying?
I'd like that, but I don't want our mortals to be in a world of constant daylight. That feels...
Well, you could have this Dyson sphere thing. You could have your sun in the middle. You could have a normal Earth planet inside there.
Oh, instead of a ring?
Have a Dyson sphere the size of the fucking, real world asteroid belt. You'd still have moons, you'd still have other planets. you know, just kind of or like the fucking work cloud for that matter.
Yes, let's move on. Let's not spend the entire episode talking about the cosmology.
Okay. I mean, this is the kind of cool shit that I like about fantasy is when it tries to take some science and physics to it, and I'm all about bending and fucking up physics, but this kind of shit I could talk about for an entire episode.
Yeah.
So if we're gonna just
We've
kill
spent
that.
half an episode, so yes, we could easily talk a full episode.
So immortals live in a giant beach ball, and they live on the inside of the beach ball.
Sure.
There's a sun at the center, and there's just a normal spherical planet orbiting that sun, just like Earth, and that's where the mortal races live.
Sounds good. So, what are the races that live on this world?
The mortals?
Yeah, the mortal races. Are they typical D&D races, or are we going to create new races for this world?
Well, before we get to there, let's talk a little bit about the geography of the mortal planet itself. Like in Abena, we're mostly in a water world. That's largely Kyle's world right now. That's going to be a completely different set of life forms that evolve versus something that's like some Pangea supercontinent thing.
Did we watch too much Kevin Costner growing up? Like you and all of us when we made 2 D&D campaigns in the primarily water worlds?
Man,
Kyle's is not necessarily a water world. We are limited to a very small part of it. We could very well be an archipelago. We could very well be Malaysia.
The only water.
We could very well be in Malaysia,
Yeah.
on the Earth.
Kyle, you are right. I watched too much Kevin Costner movies as a kid, though, specifically The Postman and Waterworld. I think I've only just now, at 30 years of life, because of your comment, figured out what an impact those 2 movies had on my adolescent brain. Not even kidding. So that's a fun one to wrangle with, bud.
Oof. I just think it is, jokes aside, I think it is interesting that we've done, but 1 as a group and then 2, your own creative impetus, relatively water-based worlds.
I just like boats.
No, the boats are cool. Like, I just think it's interesting that I would wonder if we were to pull other groups that have made their own worlds where they've aired. Like, have they also aired toward more water-based stuff? Have they done more, you got 3 days hard ride kind of deal? Or, like, did they fucking just, like, it's in the air? The whole thing's in the
I
air.
think we as a group just like boats a lot.
Just like boats a lot.
Yes, us landlocked here in Middle America,
Yep.
we
Like
really
boats.
like boats for some reason.
False. Lake Erie leads you to the ocean.
So does the Ohio River.
Lake Erie is some 200 miles from here.
I mean,
I consider us very squarely landlocked.
Yeah.
We have a river here in our town.
it's muddy 2 feet deep. Okay, so, real quick. Geography of the world upon which the mortals live. For the sake of time, do we want to say it's Earth-like?
Yes, 70% water on the surface.
Large land masses, there's some island chains.
General speckling of
Yeah.
ecosystems, not doing a Lucas-style homogeneous planet.
Wait, you don't want the whole thing to
No,
be forest, Jordan?
No, everything is temperate zone. The entire planet, because that's the typical fantasy setting. Everything is temperate, so everything is temperate in this world.
So, Earth-like mortal world, that's checked off. As for our races that populate it, they've fractured away from the dead or fractured original god. Do we want them to be elements of the original god's whole personality that have split off into archetypical personality fragments, or something wildly different based on different biomes, based on...
Let's do a different race for each major biome. I think that'd be fun.
I can get behind that.
Sure.
Jungle boys. We got Arctic boys. We got ocean lads.
They're the youngest, the ocean lads.
So tropical,
Tropical
jungle, elves.
Yeah, the ocean stuff's the easiest. That's, your merfolk, whatever equivalent. If it's anything like Darwinian evolution, that'd be the oldest race.
So we got some like Atlantis shit hanging out and fucking...
Unless it's like whales or dolphins where like they were like a wolf kind of thing and then like went back into the water at some point and,
I like the idea of, like, furry mer people. Furry, lowercase f. Like, God damn it. No,
You went there.
I like the idea of mer people that aren't like your typical, either human-skinned or maybe they got some scales. Like, they could have, like polar bear fur, you know? Like, the polar bears can...
Otters.
So that's too inventive. Our aquatic species should all just be murlocs. Yeah, that's all they can do. And they got little tridents. That's my vote. Your guys' idea is too creative.
Sea lion mer people. We going with that?
I like that.
Now, are they amphibious? Can they do both? Get you a creature that can do both?
I can kind of waddle along on the beach.
They can breathe, though. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, okay.
We'll do.
So it's not an Abe Sapien situation where you gotta get the water filters on the gills?
Nah, it'd be like a huge lung capacity, you know. Do deep dives like a sperm whale.
We do want our players to be able to play these races, so I think they should be able to operate on land with some disadvantages.
Does the Murph people even need to be a player character race?
Yeah, why not?
I agree. No, I really do. I think that if you make a race, it should be a playable race.
What?
Yep.
That's ridiculous.
Did I stutter?
No, you said something preposterous.
Okay, new biome. What else?
Okay, do dragons exist? What is the apex creature? What is the apex creature on this world?
I can't swing you guys for murlocs. Okay.
Well, we could do some kind of
If we make them like piranha, you
Yeah.
can swing me.
like a really nasty deep sea terror type thing could be, although it's still limited to the ocean. That's the thing about dragons; they can fucking fly anywhere.
I like the idea of maybe some sort of hawk-esque creature. So not so much dragon, because dragon's can fly, sure, but like it's got its den or whatever the fuck, and it can like lumber out and set stuff on fire. But like something like pure, like you never know when it's gonna swoop down.
Like a thunderbird.
Kinda, yeah. Like that thing's up there. You don't know if it's up there. You're just hanging out, adventuring. You get out of a dungeon. Thunderbird attack.
Hear me out. Bird-like creature. No, I guess this is still kind of dragonish. I was going to say, like, you got different elemental powers, but they're elemental dragons. But specifically the idea I had was like a bird-like creature, and I was thinking, alright, it's a bird, so it has eggs. It poops out bombs. Bomb bird.
Wow.
Isn't that a Mario 2 villain?
I believe so.
I guess, like, what, aside from it being big and being able to fly long distances and, like, I almost like the idea that, okay, oh god, alright, ideas just hitting me. It's like a Shadow of the Colossus situation. There's not a lot of these things, but they are, like, tough to take down, nearly impossible, like, kind of pseudo-mythical creatures that don't really reproduce. So there's a limited quantity. And they don't have to land. They could just be flying up there forever. They maybe only come down to, like, feed. And that's it. And other than that, they're just up there flying around. That's my idea to workshop. And we could even say for, like, cool world building, there was 10 of them. And now there's, like, 8. 2 of them managed to get themselves killed.
Did we just go down a rabbit hole towards monsters when we were meaning to get the races?
I don't care if we go down the rabbit hole of monsters. I just want to know what are the cultures of this world?
Yeah.
What races have culture?
Yeah.
Because monsters can have cultures too.
Sure.
I was just trying to answer the Apex Predator question.
Yeah.
Because now you can have a race that either has a significant religious affiliation with the birds, the Thunderbirds, or not the shitty movie and earlier TV show Thunderbirds, to be clear. Or maybe their whole culture. But yeah, something that, like, either a significant part of their religion is based around these birds, or their whole cultural concept is based around the birds. Maybe, like, their entire idea of fucking death and rebirth is sky burial style, like, this thing eats your dead, or human sacrifice, however you want to handle it. Maybe their magical power they believe is drawn from either sacrifice or, like, a spiritual connection to the birds.
That sounds like some race that would live on like grasslands and plains and stuff. That
Sort
would,
of steppe race,
so
perhaps.
Who are they? I'm gonna say centaurs have the advantage in that kind
Yeah,
of
no,
situation.
I like that idea.
Actually, I was thinking more like gnomes, only make them more prairie dog in their
Oh, I love
in their
that.
culture. So when the terrifying Thunderbird comes over, they got to get down deep in their homes.
Poor little guys.
I like that.
That'd be really interesting as a player character, because when you'd be traveling with the group, you would never want to stay out in the open too long, and everyone would be like, what the fuck's wrong with you? And you're like, do you not understand? The bird eats my people?
It loves our tiny little bodies. We're delicious to it.
God, yeah, a place that lives on, or a race that lives on the plains, but is agoraphobic.
It's kind of funny. They probably every day are like, we didn't ask to get put here.
Little gnome tunnel villages underground and stuff.
Who do we want to be our race of, like, scholars and researchers, or alternatively, a race that is very religious about the world's cosmology? Because living on the poles, the ice caps, if I'm thinking correctly, they would get the best chance to study the Dyson sphere where the immortals live, since they're up at the top of this planet and they can always get a look up or down at the beach ball, the inside of the beach ball, we keep calling it.
Mm-hmm. Wait, why would they have a better view of it than anyone else?
Because their day-night cycle would be fuckier. And so when it would be nighttime for them, it would be a longer night, and they could get a better glimpse of it, if I'm thinking correctly, physically.
How important is that to be a significant race? Because that, you're talking huge distances from, like, just to get to the part of the planet that has the fucked up day-night cycle where they have months on end of daylight or nighttime. When I want to make like a bunch of different races, I want to make sure that they can interact with each other. Mm-hmm. Like kind of the different, like a plains race can be like literally right next to like a jungle race, because those biomes can be right next to each other.
I kind of like my initial idea of having that race that like is very long-lived and doesn't like to give up the power and such, maybe fitting into Kyle's idea, because they would be the types that would not have to worry about that long travel time or really concern themselves with association. So they're already kind of isolationist just by virtue of knowing what like their core building concept is. It would make sense that they would like go isolate themselves in like some fucking monasteries or like learning towers or something.
I think most of our races should be able to do what Clayton said and be able to trade and intermingle openly. But we could pick one race that is more like what you're all describing. And the cool thing about that is that race wouldn't be homogenous, because they would have one family living on the North Pole and one family living on the South Pole. And they could be the same race, but they could have wildly different cultures, like high elves versus wood elves, sort of a deal. Not that they have to be elves, but
Arctic elves and Antarctic elves.
I mean, I like that idea, and I think all the other biomes should match up. I mean, you got to throw humans in there.
Where do we want our human boys to live? Just our men and women of humanity.
Well, typically in fantasy, humans are the most adaptable. They're the most. They're going to be the race that has spread the most from their origin. So I don't think it really matters for humans as much to pin them down to a particular environment.
Then what biomes have we not covered?
We've got ice. We've got plains. We got ocean.
Yeah.
Got jungle left.
Mountains.
Desert.
About flying squirrel-like halflings that live in the mountains.
I love it.
Just to put a little bit too much real world in here. I see flying squirrels as being more forest than mountain, because they're just gliders. They're not active flyers.
Yeah, sure. So bat halflings in the mountains?
Yeah.
Yeah, but just a bunch of flying boys. It's kind of interesting.
They'd have to be little. I think it's dumb when you get like real big flying humanoids in game worlds. I always just think, man, that doesn't work. It's one of those things that pushes my suspension of disbelief buttons.
I kind of like the idea of jungle dwarves. You got you can still have that
Like
sick
Vietnam?
mining.
Well, they're only short because they're not getting the nutrition they need because they're, oppressed.
Under embargo.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Okay. You can still have that mining culture.
Mm-hmm.
You can have jungle mines.
Yeah, I got their tunnels,
You got tunnels. You got.
traps.
I just like the idea of dwarves in the jungle,
They're
Jordan.
very crafty.
See, I was kind of thinking desert dwarves, and dwarves being what you think they are, stouter, shorter races. They could literally have, pouches and sacks within their bodies to hold water and shit, like a camel.
You're getting gross.
That's kind of disturbing. You poke one, you just hear
I mean, I don't know
water
what...
sloshing around in there.
No, camel humps are, cartilage, right? So they're pretty solid. I've never touched
So you're
camel.
giving them camel humps?
Not necessarily camel humps, but, think of, just like a lumpy little desert lady. Just kind of,
Carrying water in her water sacks.
And big
Not her
axes.
breasts.
She's strong. Tromping around the desert. Doesn't need to drink a lot of water. Got water sacks.
Hey Ragnar, can you fill up my water skin? Sure.
God.
Gross.
I don't see. You can't tap a camel hump for water either. That's a cactus.
So, cactar in the desert. I deliver that kind of trolls in the dungeons. But yeah, fucking sentient cactus people hanging out in the desert that reproduce like cells. You cut one in half and it
I mean, I'm all about plant races. That's not done enough, in my opinion.
So that's their inherent advantage of playing it as a PC is you're pretty damn hard to kill, but
Oh, you're Groot, sort of.
kind of Groot-like. But then the difference being is when your arm gets cut off, it grows into a separate cactar that's not you. So then who do you play? You have to pick then as the PC. Do I stick with my cactar or do I play this other cactar?
I think it'd be interesting if the plant race was optionally carnivorous, where if you wanted to just soak up nutrients from the soil and get sunlight, you can do that, and over time you start slowing down and you get kind of stuck in place because you're just not getting enough energy to move around. But if you started gobbling up some flesh, you would have energy to move, and if you wanted to keep mobile, you'd have to just fucking eat
And
flesh
that would
in
make
some way.
other races distrust you
Yeah.
because you'd be over there
You can eat little
cannibalizing
animals and things.
the dead people.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what.
We need a bad guy race, and I think those cactus things are screaming out to be the bad guy race.
Sounds pretty good.
So they've got carnivorous, Venus flytrap type chompers that trap and digest. They've got big pitcher plant things that could expose themselves and just swallow up one of the little gnome guys on the prairie hole
Yeah.
and digest them over time. Ugh.
They could spray it with hallucinogenic spores and
Imagine
start gobbling on you.
fighting these things as an army, because every time you cut one in half, there's two more of them, and then they come out, they're full adults. It's not like there's a gestation period. Boom, 5 minutes go by, there's two of them now. You
So-
can't fight them. How
so-
have these things not overrun the world? That's what we need to figure out.
So combining the worst traits of a cactus and a starfish.
Yeah, and Piccolo. He's in there. He's green. He's basically a plant, right?
So I think that works awesomely as the bad guy race who everybody's got to quickly kill as soon as possible, as soon as you know that it's there, or else it's going to become a problem that you can't handle.
They're not even really evil. They're just doing their thing,
Yeah.
I would say fire definitely is we'll do troll logic. Fire stops
Sure.
the regenerative process. But if you're some farmer and fucking 3 of those cactar come shuffling at you, you're like, fuck! And you cut one in half, and now there's 4 of them, and you're like, shit. And then they eat your family.
Mm-hmm.
It's disturbing. You hear your wife's screams as this cactus devours her flesh.
With every child they eat the next one faster.
Terrifying.
Do they get bigger each time they eat?
I like to think that
Plants just
they
bigger
get
and
bigger.
bigger.
I like to think they
Big
get
ass,
bigger
like 15-foot-tall cactuses and stuff.
if they do the set, like, if they stay still, like you were talking about. I like to think that's the bigger process. The consuming thing is only if they want to stay quick and mobile, you know.
What if they eat and then choose to take root instead of running around
Then
and
you
put
get
all that
super big.
energy towards growth?
Yeah.
Also, would be a pretty fun race to play. Like, that would be a pretty wild, playable character race.
How in the hell would you balance that?
I don't
It'd be
know.
tough. It'd be real tough.
Well, we're just the ideas guys. We're not the balance team.
Hey, we'll give these on to those math nerds to figure out.
I mean, you're talking vampire mechanics, so there's like a huge burden to continuously be eating. And they probably have to eat a lot more than a normal person would to keep this up. So
Yeah.
So, we've still got then jungle, right?
Yeah,
I
because
thought we were doing dwarves.
yeah,
we got jungle dwarves.
Dwarves
Okay.
in black pajamas.
We've got both both forest and mountain halflings that can fly and glide around, but one's bat-like and one's more marsupial.
Sure.
I think we were just going for the balance.
So then, okay.
I think that's everything. So we did ocean, we did polar stuff, we did humans.
We did jungle. What would we do for forest?
Yeah, we still need like a good, just a deciduous redwood forest species still. Unless we want to say the dwarves live there too.
Throw the elves in there.
Oh wait,
Kinda
did we forget about the elves?
We haven't done
Those
elves.
were at the poles, weren't they?
Or,
They- what-
well, we
the
didn't
long
really
live.
establish what the long-lived thing was, but I guess that could be our elves.
People grasp the idea. I'm fine with that, for simplicity's sake.
Are we gonna have like orcs and goblins and stuff like that? They'd be fine in the forest.
They're camouflaged.
Sure. I'm fine with that.
Well, look at that. We got races.
Got some races.
Fine by me.
As you can probably guess from the runtime, this episode went a bit long, so we are going to be dividing it into multiple parts. Stay tuned for next time when we come back and continue on brainstorming a new campaign setting. This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.